lunch session to talk about storytelling with us. My name is Peter Arvai. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Prezi. You may have seen our product used by companies like Salesforce and TED at TED or at NPR and many others. Sharp is one I wanted to mention particularly today. And 85 million people have started to use Prezi to create stunning visuals and tell great stories. In fact, if there's one thing that we've seen is that more and more of our presenters see themselves as storytellers, using storyteller techniques to make their presentations stand out. And as we've gotten to know other people in the business, Pixar, among many others, we're seeing that the storytelling technique really translates across many crafts and companies. And so with us here today is Jason Katz from Pixar. And let's see if we can get the tech going too as well.
Well, my name is Jason Katz. I'm a story supervisor at Pixar. I've been there for 23 years, literally half my life. I started when I was 10. No.
Sorry.
But I've worked in the story department since the beginning. I've gotten to work on all 3 Toy Story films, Finding Nemo, Ratatouille, and most recently I just finished up I was one of the co-creators on the movie Coco, which hopefully you guys are starting to see billboards of out there.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen them yet, as you'll walk out, I'm sure you'll start to notice them everywhere. Around the city. And what we thought we'd do here today is just share our best tips and tricks essentially on how to do good storytelling, because we believe that it's worthwhile investing in, and if you do, then you'll have great win. And I think we can even show you guys that this is accessible for every single one of you here in the audience today. And as we were preparing this show, presentation, story for you guys, we thought about how could we convey to you guys what storytelling and the craft of storytelling really is. Okay. And we thought about this metaphor of building a house. Sure, you want to walk into this really nice, pretty house once it's built, but what goes into building that?
Yeah, how do you get there?
Yeah, and that's what we wanted to kick things off with.
And we thought too, a lot of our conversations earlier, there are similar ways of going about telling a good story. There's certainly similar tools that we found were quite similar between the tools that I've been using at Pixar for my career and what you might need to do, what you might need to use to tell a good presentation. We started talking about this idea of a thematic or controlling idea is what we use at Pixar, and it's the thing that we really try to start off with. What's the movie about? What is that feeling? What is that message that you're going to feel when the credits roll and you're in the theater, the lights go up? I brought up an example of being a story artist on Finding Nemo, and we were at the very beginning. We didn't know what this movie was going to be. All we knew was fish. And Andrew Stanton, the director and the writer, he's one of the original founders, the Fab Four, we call him at Pixar. He's my director, and he came in with a personal story, a question he had, and he talked to us about being a father. He has 2 kids. He has a daughter and a son. His son's the oldest. They're off into college now, but at the time his son was 5. And he told the story of going out and just being a parent with his son. And instead of being engaged and goofing around and having a good time, he was stressed out the whole time. Get down from there, don't put that in your mouth. Come over here, get out of the street. And it brought a question into his brain. Is this fear keeping me from being a good parent? And that was our controlling idea. That was our thematic that he put up. We had it on a big, and it sounds like I'm making it up, but it literally was written on a big whiteboard. Does fear keep a good parent from being, or does fear keep a parent from being a good one, right? So the idea of fear versus faith or fear versus trust, that was our controlling idea. Every scene in the movie, if you go back and watch it, is really about that battle, fear versus trust. And so that with that controlling idea, we were able to kind of now have a true north, have something that would guide us as we were creating our movie, building our movie.
Yeah, and we see actually a very similar thing for our customers. We call it the takeaway message. You got to decide your takeaway message. And just to show you one example of how one of our customers are using this concept, this is Chris Bennett. He works with concrete. And so you might be wondering, how do you tell a great story about concrete? This is actually what it looks like. You can see that's what he does. But in order to find that takeaway message, sort of like what you were saying, Jason, you have to actually dig into your personal background a bit. And Chris talks about how he, with his dad, used to go hiking in the Northwest Mountains. He grew up on the East Coast, and his dad would always tell him, we should leave nature in better condition than before we went. And of course, they saw a lot of rubbish probably along the roads, and something that Chris's dad really installed into him was this idea that, yeah, we should leave it prettier. And that's one of the things that really bothers Chris today when he goes around the city in New York and see just a 30, 40-year-old bridge breaking down. And that's something that he wants to work for, and he wants to really bring this passion now, and the idea that in order to keep America's integrity, it's as a physical metaphor, he wants to build better concrete.
Yeah. And so, you know, when you're now diving into a story and you've got your controlling idea, I'll steal my own words, but you know, now you've got to build it. You've got this kind of true north established, and now we're kind of getting into the idea of building this structure. And we both work in visual mediums, and so using visuals to help support that, to help build that, because you want to try to find a way to craft your story.
If we keep to the metaphor of building the house, we can see that, you know, we can build a pretty house on the outside, but if the structure is missing, well, then it starts to look a little bit like this. So how do we find the right structure that will really convey that message that we figured out just a minute ago?
Yeah. So at Pixar, we use beginning, middle, and end. And anybody who's taken a writing class or talked about movies, you've heard that before, the idea of having a solid beginning, you have a middle, that's your movie basically, and your end, your resolution of your film. But honestly, when we're creating our films, every scene has a beginning, middle, and end. Every moment has a beginning, middle, and end. Down to the granular, an animator will have a second and a half to animate, and they're looking for the beginning, middle, and end of that little bit of the film. And so this example from Nemo, I thought was a good one. And this is just a scene. This is the opening scene. I'm sorry if you haven't seen Nemo. I'm going to ruin the opening of the movie. But the idea is this is a scene that we were needed to have a beginning, middle, and end to kind of help shape it. And the beginning is usually your setup. This is Marlin and his wife, Coral, and they've got all these kids, new kids, and their future is out there. But Marlin is a frightened, just naturally frightened kind of guy. He's a nervous guy, and his wife is outgoing and saying he's worried about living on the edge of the ocean. And she's saying, no, this is fine. This is a great place. Look at the view. Look at what we're going to expose our children to. This is where we should be. And he's like, all right, I'll be cool with that. And then our meat of the scene is this traumatic attack from this barracuda. And Marlin's knocked out, and he wakes up to find his wife gone and all of his kids gone except for this one egg that has a little dent in it. And the last line of this scene is, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to make sure nothing ever happens to you, Nemo. Again, that's our beginning. That's our arc. The beginning, our opening, we set up an idea, set up a question. We set up this is what our character expects his world to be like. The middle forces that conversation, that emotional response, and the ending now gives us the change to that. And like all stories, there are tools that we're using. We have a hero, or our protagonist that we use is Marlin, and we have a villain. We have our antagonistic force, and this is literally an antagonistic force of nature, the barracuda, helping to drive the story, helping to give us some now structure to this. And it's something we can use all throughout the film. You know, again, we're looking to try to tell this story with honest emotion. We're trying to build up some tension to then let it go with the resolution and build it up again. And so if you look at the course of a movie, we're taking you up and down on purpose to really try to make that entire experience emotionally engaging. We're also doing other things. Again, we're utilizing tools. So this is an example I like to use in that this is kind of an editorial example. You take this baseball player, you see he's up at bat. It's a very recognizable image. But if I put something else in front of him, well, that elicits an emotional response. This guy's going to beat a puppy, right? But if I change that image of the puppy and I put something else there, well, now that is a different emotion. And I could just juxtapose two images, and all of a sudden I can elicit an emotional response. Also, just by using framing devices and filmmaking devices. There's this example we have from Ratatouille, where this is a scene I storyboarded in Ratatouille, and it was Remy. He was up on the window, and he was looking into the world he wanted to be a part of. But if you look at this image, this is a great example of he's the same size of all those chefs down there. You know, he feels like he belongs in there. He's not this small little rat anymore. And it's just by where he is in the camera and using some filmmaking techniques, we're able to kind of, again, not subliminally, but we're kind of implying that this is where he should be.
I love this example, and in fact, it goes to the heart that we see some of our best communicators use in Prezi as well. So, as in Nemo, Chris also has a beginning, a middle, and end, and we usually advise our customers to talk about, in the beginning, establishing essentially that you have empathy for your customer that you're speaking to. And then in the middle, bring some sort of insight to them, something that's unique that you can offer, and at the very end, of course, also show that what you can offer to them can significantly change their lives for the better. And once you have that beginning, middle, and end, then you can also start to identify the heroes and the villains. So in the case of Chris, the hero is a concrete building that has lasted over 2,000 years in ancient Rome. And then you have the villain, the weather, that's destroying concrete. And so we're using very similar tools when we're telling stories in a business presentation, whether we think about it or not. And here's the takeaway message for Chris translated into a big picture overview. So he's working on a project now on the Liberty Island where the Statue of Liberty stands, and he's decided to take his big picture overview of his entire story to be the statue itself. Then, of course, he digs into various parts of this picture, showing the actual concrete where a museum will stand, which is the part that he contributes to the project. And by that, now he's tying together all of that emotional response to, the emotional response we have to the most iconic symbol of America, the symbol of opportunity and freedom, together with the actual product that he's delivering. And this matters a lot. In fact, we have seen, just thanks to some research that Harvard researchers were doing in this summer, that if you manage to tell your story in a concise way like this, one big picture where you drill into different parts, that will provide an up to 25% improved effectiveness in how you deliver the message. And this may sound good, but I think I want to give you a thought experiment to understand how that really could be. So why don't you all just join in here, and I'm going to ask you all to recall your 5 favorite kitchen appliances. So your 5 favorite kitchen appliances, and then when you're done, just raise your hand so I can tell that you have all had a chance to think through which those are. So 5 favorite kitchen appliances. Okay, good. We're getting there. Just a few more moments for the last ones. Okay.
I'm not cheating either. We haven't talked about this.
Okay. So Jason, then maybe you could share your 5 favorite ones.
My favorite ones, so these are ones I care about. My toaster,
Okay.
my refrigerator,
Yep.
my range, my coffee maker, yeah, of course, and how about my blender?
Okay. Great. So I don't know if you noticed what Jason was doing as he was naming these different things, but you could see his eyes sort of looking around in his, you were even gesturing to show different parts of your kitchen, right?
Yeah.
And so what we can see is that the way our brain works has actually to do with how you should create your visuals. Now, for a moment, let's just think about what you didn't do in order to remember your 5 appliances. You didn't build a list of words, neither bullet pointed or alphabetized, nothing spelled out. Is that right?
No, I just kind of pictured it.
Okay. And actually, we know now today that if Jason had done this bullet pointed list and shown it next to him, then you would have been less likely to understand what he says. Isn't this weird? So we know that so many presentations look exactly like this, full of text and bullet points, right? But if you show it, it turns out that people will understand and retain that information less than had you shown nothing at all. How can that be? Does anyone have a guess?
You phoned a friend, that doesn't count.
So essentially what happens is that text processing is so complicated for our brain that when we do that, we can't do anything else. So you probably have all tried to do this, like read a book and listen to the radio at the same time. Impossible, right? But when presenters show texts on their slides or in their presentations, that's exactly the situations that they create. They force audiences to listen to the radio and read a book at the same time. And what happens is that the people start skipping back and forth between the text and the visual and the presenters. And when that happens, you miss half of each part. And so, okay, if there's one thing you take away from this session is never show slides with text on, okay? Okay? But maybe you want to know what you actually can do. And this thought experiment is a great example of what you actually can do, because in order for you to remember your 5 things, you sort of looked at, oh, what does my toaster look like? It could be, you know, it could be metallic or plastic. But as important as the visual itself was actually to show what's next to the toaster and what's next to the blender. That's why you were looking around in your kitchen, what's next to each other. So if you can summarize your entire story through one picture and dive into the different parts, that will really help people to connect the dots, and a story will emerge. And when a story emerges, then people act. And that's why we think that you know, showing these great overviews that has that takeaway message built into them become more effective, 25% more effective than if you were to use just a regular slide after slide after slide. Okay, but let's go back here a little bit to our, if you could go back to our Statue of Liberty. So what you see here is Chris has his takeaway message. You know, it's important for America's integrity that we build something to last a long time. And he has the symbol of the Statue of Liberty, and he have the different parts that he's digging into in order to really emphasize this message. Okay, we have this.
Yeah.
And it seems like it could actually work. I mean, one of the things that I think is the most striking about Pixar is, if you think about it, for 25 years, you guys have been able to nail one hit after another. There's consistency there.
Well,
How do you do it?
You know, again, I mean, you look at something like the Statue of Liberty. I mean, making animated movies is really hard. It takes a lot of people. They're very expensive. I think the way, I know I certainly look at it, but the way I think we look at it at Pixar is that the goal is for these things to live well beyond us, that they're going to be evergreen. They're going to be movies that will be seen over and over again. And that's a responsibility we don't take lightly. It's something we really care about. And so, you know, when we're embarking on a film, we're wanting to have a question that we're asking, a thematic that we're trying to poke at that is worthy of being asked. Again, most of us in this room might be parents. That idea of being a good parent and what does it mean to be a good parent to your child and how we need to grow to be that, that's a really relatable and interesting question to ask. Pete Docter, who directed Inside Out, was very curious about what was going on in his daughter's head. And he created a story about that question. Ratatouille's a little more straight on. It's what happens if a rat wants to cook? But it's also a movie about the world telling you you're not supposed to be what you want to be. And what do you do about that? And so those honest, emotional questions being asked, I mean, that's a thematic, hopefully, we choose that's worthy of the effort and the time. And when you're in a theater and you watch one of our movies, that you feel like it was worth your time, that we weren't just putting a bunch of fart jokes and gags that might elicit some response, but they're not going to be something that you're going to want to watch again or be a part of. You're not going to feel like we've had a point.
Yeah, and we're at the AMC theaters here right now doing this session, and you really get one chance.
No, yeah, I mean, again, in anything, you get one chance for an audience to see your movie for the first time and for it to work or not work. And again, that's what it's about. It's about being able to communicate a thought, an idea, a joke, an emotion, and take people on a ride for 90 plus minutes and have it be worth their time.
One of the things that Jason told me before we sat down for this was that you guys do like many cuts of
Absolutely.
The same movie.
I worked on Coco for 6 years, and we showed the movie 9 times. And what I mean, that's the entire film brought up. Now, we did a bunch of table reads and a bunch of treatments and a bunch of early work on the front end, but the process at Pixar is an iterative one, and it's one that we don't rush. Again, I feel like it is part of why we were able to find some sort of consistency, is that 6 years is a long time to make a movie, and we will show it every 3-4 months to the company, and we will open it up for any kind of notes, any kind of feedback. And again, what we're looking for is, do you understand our controlling idea? Are you resonating with that message? Does that thematic mean something? Is it worth telling? Did we tell it in the clearest way possible? And we will open it up. Sometimes we'll get very good notes. Sometimes we'll get harsh notes. But we will iterate and change. And by the time that movie gets out in theaters, it's been adjusted, worked, questioned, doubted. Like we tend to pride ourselves. We want to be enthusiastic and the same fans of film that we were at the beginning. We also want to be that annoying person 3 rows behind you going, that doesn't really make sense. Oh, that would never work. Or I saw that coming. Like, that's the culture consistently at Pixar. Andrew Stanton is the biggest jerk there is. He's the one that will tell you when he smells something a mile away. It's important to do that, to make sure we have that clarity.
Yeah, and this iterative approach to the final delivery moment is definitely something that we see with our successful storytellers as well. In fact, if there's one thing that surprises us is that how few people actually take this moment seriously enough. Because, in fact, many of our customers say, well, they've spent $10,000 to $100,000 really building up to that one meeting that they're going to get. They've been spending money on Twitter and then, of course, on Salesforce, and now they finally get to that meeting, and then they do what? Well, in the worst case, they force people to read a book and listen to the radio at the same time. Like, that's not the way to do it. This should be the climax of the entire experience. So what could that look like? That's something that we should take a look at.
Yeah, well, we brought an example from Finding Nemo. Again, if you haven't seen the movie, I'm going to ruin it for you. But the idea is we had a story, and you saw the setup earlier, where this is a story about a fearful father, and a legitimately horrible thing happened to him, and it's going to, it would change all of our lives. And this entire movie was about him coming to grips with that. And so this is the moment in the movie where we have the ending, and we have the choice for him to finally make. Is he going to be the father his instincts tell him to be, or the father he needs to be?
Turn around! You're going the wrong way!
You're right. I know you can.
Lucky Finn!
Now go! Hurry!
Tell all the fish to swim down!
Spoiler, they swim down. But again, here's your character. He spent this entire movie trying to get his son. He finally got his son, and what he has to do is let his son go in there and risk his life. He doesn't know if his son's going to survive, and if I was in that situation, I would have a hard time believing it was going to work out. But that's what the movie has to be, and hopefully, again, you're sucked into it. You, at the same time, want Nemo to swim in there and save Dory, but at the same time, you want him to be safe.
Yeah, and let's share also some video of what it's like for Chris telling his story.
The new museum at Liberty Island is dedicated to the legacy and the history, not just of the statue, but a story of America itself. We're in an era where construction, resiliency, sustainability, the carbon footprint for everything we do on a job site matters. When you're communicating new technology, new ideas, new solutions,
the synergy of work is there. The 11,000 people that are in my organization, the professionals that are learning the craft, can now take the Prezis that I give them and use the same tool all the way down the chain.
in my line of work, if you're not innovating, you're falling behind. Concrete doesn't need to have an expiration date. That's not sustainable. That's not resilient. Likewise, the way you communicate should mirror the way you approach your business. Prezi is something that advances with you.
I think this is a great project. I love how Chris can take innovation and apply it to a large-scale project like the Liberty Project, and we can actually see the things that scientists and chemists are doing in the lab enacted in real life, and to see that whole process, and to think that it all came around and came about, through a common vision that was shared, on a tablet. That's really something.
So the main thing that we've learned is that, yes, storytelling is possible for everyone to do. Yeah. And with a little bit of tips and tricks on how to do it, you can start doing it as well. And it will definitely help in how you communicate with your audiences. If you want to learn more about this, you can join us at our booth. And you can also try out some really new exciting stuff like Prezi AR, where you get to be in the middle of a presentation. This is Guy Rez from NPR talking about his family and I think how he gets distracted by mobile phones, but what to do about that as well. And so please join at 111 if you're more interested in that. And then if you have any questions, we have a few minutes left for that.
You also just, if you kill a parent at the beginning of your presentation, that also elicits an emotional response. Just throw that out there.
And there's mics, I think, on the side that you can go to, then everyone can hear you as well.
We'll try to repeat it as well. Or we'll make you come up here.
Is this on? You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
My name is Dan. You guys are both from companies that are really known for digital output of your projects, whether it's a movie or whether it's a presentation. I'm curious about the amount of analog work, handwork that goes in advance when you're scripting and creating before you get into the digital tools. Are you believers in that, or any opinion on that?
Yeah, if we can zoom out here for a second and just sort of go first and just
go
say,
for it.
The reason why we showed this picture was actually just to give you an idea of what you can do to sort of storyboard your presentation or your movie for that matter, because I think you guys have essentially daily stand-ups where you're looking at these
Well,
things.
I mean, the filmmaking process is we certainly incorporate some digital tools, but the way I do my job is very much like it was in the analog days of Disney. The storyboard process is meant to be fast, and the creation process is meant to be fast. So digital has absolutely moved its way. I draw on glass now and on a Cintiq, and we edit digitally. But fundamentally, it's about creating it as in the closest to analog as possible. But we have sculptors and we have painters and we have and all of those things. Again, you're trying to get that clarity as quickly as possible. And the thing about technology is technology allows you to do all kinds of fancy stuff, and you can get stuck in it and distracted, or frankly, that's a good hiding spot too. So forcing yourself to simplify and look at what you're trying to do, how you're trying to tell your story, the point you're trying to make as quickly as possible. Yeah. That's really the goal.
Yep. And on our end, we're definitely seeing that everyone has a little bit their own process to get there. Some people like working with text to really write out their storyboard, and other people actually prefer the visual format of whether it's a whiteboard or a Prezi to really group their ideas, just as we're showing you here, and easily switch out stuff and see how that changes the structure of the story.
I mean, I think this is a good example. I mean, this slide. When I look at it, what I appreciate about it is I'm an artist. That's more the way my brain works. But I look at it and I can relate to Post-its and a whiteboard, and there's an analog quality to it that helps ground me, and I do think that's what I would want to shoot for anyways. It's again, something that you're relating to. Anybody else?
Okay, very good.
Oh,
we have.
Go,
Yeah.
speak loudly.
Yeah, so I'm with the nonprofit organization First Book. We're a nonprofit social enterprise delivering books to kids in need. When you do my work with Disney, when you're coming up with that central organizing human message, you talk a lot about having a human resonant emotions and conditions that we will personally identify, being a parent.
Yeah.
How do you capitalize on that when you're trying to captivate donors on behalf of people who need your help?
Well, again, I mean, that you kind of answered your question a bit. I mean, those are people that you need.
Maybe we
help.
should repeat the question.
So, yeah, I'm sorry. So how do you capitalize on getting donors committed or interested in something for people who need their help? And, I would assume you're again, start with the ending and work forward. You're looking to try to have people connect with this idea that someone out there needs your help. Someone out there is in need, and you, as a donor, a potential donor, have the ability to make a change. And again, so I would assume just having someone be able to relate to that. At one point in your life, you needed help. What was that like? At one point in that person's, again, people weren't, if you're talking to a donor, if you're talking to someone who can make a difference, just having them recognize that they can make a difference, right? And giving them a face, giving them an idea. I mean, that's real. That's a real thing. It's a real human thing. Personally, I would look for something that, again, a story that, from my life, that would help me speak honestly about that. A moment where I was able to make a change, or a moment where I felt like someone really stepped in and did that for me. Again, we're all here because of many people doing many things for us in our lives, from our parents, from mentors, from teachers, or whatnot. And so everybody should be able to relate to that. And I guess that's what makes sense to me.
Yeah, and if I can add, like, you know, really when you're at the beginning of a story, there you need to establish that you need to understand that you are understanding your audience. So one way of doing that is to tie your personal story to whatever the situation is, right? In case of Chris, he has a real emotional tie to the making better concrete. It's very clear. And the more you can establish that relationship, that I care about this personally, that I know you also care about, I think the more effective of a start you get on your story.
Oh, cool. We got time for one more if there's any.
Hi, my name is Lauren. We're trying to get all our leaders to be much more effective storytellers. If you were to accelerate that inside a culture, this capability of storytelling, do you have any kind of fast track or kind of accelerant ideas to develop and promote more of that around leaders to think and act that way more?
Outside of killing the parent at the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. Going tell the boss first and then go.
Yeah. Well, I would encourage them to take the time to honestly look at how they're connecting to what they're talking about. Like, why? Well, again, because hopefully we're all fortunate enough to, you know, again, there's times where you're just presenting something that is just information. But there is an opportunity to look at what does that information mean to you? How does it affect your life? And I think there's a way to find a level of honesty. Again, I've had conversations, given talks where I'm like, I don't know anything about this. I'm going to be honest. So I'm in it with you guys. You know, storytelling is something that is really, again, to use Andrew Stanton again. Andrew Stanton he's a great structure mind, but he's also an incredible joke teller. And he says storytelling is joke telling. And it's the same thing. It's about a setup. It's about an investment. I'm going to bring you along, and then I'm going to give you a punchline, a payoff. And again, for any great storyteller or anybody who's needing to learn how to storytell, become a storyteller, at least get your setup and get your punchline clear. Get it worked out. It doesn't have to be hilarious. If it's clear, that's a good presentation. If you're able to now elicit some sort of emotional response and have some sort of connection to it, well, then that is a joke teller who is able to do the voices and able to really get in there and put you in that moment. That's a bigger laugh. But again, what I think we're talking about is getting that clear message across first, and then doing it at an elevated level second.
Yeah. We're also seeing that it's interesting. As children, we are actually great storytellers, and then something happens to us in our education that makes us nervous and sometimes ashamed, and it makes it really hard to become an adult good storyteller. But then we see people transitioning back to becoming great storytellers.
I never agree.
And we see and we see that in organizations happening. With Prezi, we see that it could be just one individual, it can be an island, a group of people who are saying, okay, actually, in order for us to stand out and become the winners of our particular segment, we need to tell great stories. And they can do it sort of in a small group and change the entire organization, because once they start doing that, a lot of people get inspired. They start to feel an emotional connection to what they're doing, and it can take off throughout the entire organization. So if you're thinking about just, you know, how do I create that spark inside my organization, I often tell people to have somebody from brand, a designer, and maybe somebody who's just innovative and wanting to reach into that storytelling part that we've been talking about today. And you might see that you just start doing that in that small group, and soon enough, executives will join, or sometimes it starts with an executive, but then whole team joins, and it can become a real movement inside of organizations, and we've seen that happen with many of our customers.
All right, I think that's it.
I think we're out of time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.